Well, good morning. It's good to see you all this morning. I want to invite you to open a Bible with me to the book of Jonah, chapter 4. That's where we are today, is the end of the story of Jonah. Next week, it'll be the first Sunday of Advent, and so it'll be all Christmassy up in here. Lord willing, it's going to be awesome. And we're going to have our Advent candle lighting and testimonies about God's grace in people's life. It'll be a great month. I'm always excited for this season of Advent. At the end of the service today, after our the reading and preaching of God's Word, we're going to take up our global offering. And so it's a different point in the service than normally is. And the reason is we really want to do it at a special moment, an opportunity as a way to practically respond to God's word. Because Jonah chapter 4 is pretty poignant about God's compassion for the nations. And so it ends in an interesting way, though. If you look in verse 10 of the end of chapter 4 of Jonah, this is the longest section that God speaks in the entire book. And it's the last two verses. And he asks two questions. He says, the Lord said to Jonah, "You pity the plant, for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" Kind of a weird ending to the book, right? We're talking about cows. Why are we talking about cows? It's an interesting ending to a book because it kind of leaves you with sort of all these questions, right? I mean, what happens to Jonah? What happens to Nineveh? What happens to the cows? You know, like there's just all these questions. It's kind of a cliffhanger, and usually we read something like that and we go, okay, and what's next? And what, right? If you're anything like me, I hate loose ends to the end of like a movie or a story or a book. I mean, I'm that guy who loves it, where the movie ends, but before the credits roll, they do that kind of like photo montage where it shows like a couple and they're like, you know, Daniel and Rebecca got married, you know, and lived 45 years and had 8 kids, you know, or Joe became the CEO of this company, or, you know what I mean? It kind of like, you know, buttons up all the loose ends in your mind. You're like, oh, sweet, okay, everything's perfect now, you know? Like everything is resolved. And so my wife will always tease me when we're watching a movie and it gets to the end and it leaves all those sort of things up in the air. She'll start asking the questions that she knows I'm asking. You know, do they get married, Josh? You're like, I don't know. Why didn't they just tell us? You know, like, why do I have to figure it out? You know, you're the one writing the story. You know, nonetheless, I don't like loose ends. And so when we get to the end of the book of Jonah, that's what we're left with, right, is these loose ends. And so it's kind of jarring to us. Like, why did it end here? Did we run out of ink or something? But the reason is very intentional, because it ends here because it's meant to open up our hearts in a really particular way to receive God's voice in our life, to challenge us in a particular way. Because it ends with a question: should I not have pity? Should I not be, the word is literally from the womb, should I not be compassionate is the word. So anytime you see the word pity, it's talking about this idea of compassion. It's to look on someone with compassion literally from the womb, like a way a parent feels for their child. Like if you're a parent, like you've felt this before, where you've had compassion towards your child in a way that you think, man, I would love to just trade places with them. I would love to go through and endure what they're going through because I have that much of compassion for them. I'll never forget when Eden was much younger, one of my daughters. This was years ago, and Elizabeth and I were hanging out in a living room, and in the other room, we could hear all of a sudden Eden run down the stairs, and we could hear this like loud scream and then crying immediately. And I was like, oh no, that's not a good one. You know, usually I'm like, they're fine, you know, but I ran into the other room and I looked at her hand and immediately could tell like she had broken her hand. And so she was just all distraught, rightfully so. And so I was like, you and me, girl, we're getting in the car, we go to urgent care. You know, she's crying the whole way there, but then she gets really tough and poised, you know, for the rest of the night. But the entire night, it's just hours on end. We were up late into the night, early hours of the morning in the hospital as they're trying to like reset her hand. And I had never felt more so than in that moment with her, like, man, Lord, is there a way that I could trade places with her? Like, I wanted it so badly. Like, I literally felt in the time, like, break my hand, right, if you could heal hers. Like, there's a sense of compassion from the womb that you as a parent can feel for a child, let alone anybody else at times, right? Like, this is what this word is getting at here. And so what it's saying in our chapter is God has from the womb compassion towards the world. And at a general level, sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? That sounds like a good thing. But Jonah thinks God went too far, a little too compassionate, right? And so the question I think we need to consider this morning, and I'd love for you to wrestle with this, is there something, is there a way that God could act so compassionately that you would accuse him of going too far? What could God do that would make you think he crossed the line? You know, not to that person, right? You can't be compassionate to them or whatever it would be. I've been trying to ask myself this question all week. Could he do something where I would go, that's too far? See, God wants, in chapter 4, God wants his compassion, you guys, to wake us up and to realign our hearts with his. That's the whole goal of this chapter. It's just to wake us up to his compassion and realign our hearts with his. And so in the first 5 verses, what you and I clearly see is God's character. We see his action. We see his compassion. And what I want you to know here is that God's heart is revealed in his actions. God's character, his heart, it flows into his actions every single time. God's heart is revealed in his actions. Look at verse 1 with me. What does it say? But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore, now, O Lord, please take my life from me. For it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? And Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. So we notice in verse 1 that it says, it displeased Jonah exceedingly. What is it? Well, it is chapter 3, verse 10, where Nineveh repented of their sin, and God saw that they truly were repenting, and so he relented. He did not judge them in the way that Jonah went around the city saying, in 40 days you'll be overthrown. And because of God's compassion for Nineveh, we see here right away in verse 1, Jonah says, that was too far. It displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. Why is he angry? Because of his compassion. I mean, look at what he says. This is like the worst I told you so in history right here. Right? I knew you were like this, Lord. This is why, verse 2, this is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. I told you so, God. I knew you were like this. I knew you were going to be compassionate. It's so odd, you know, the way it sounds, but these are his enemies that God has just been compassionate towards. And so he's quite upset here, and what is he doing? He's recalling to his mind the character of God, who he knows God to be, who God has revealed himself in history. What Jonah's not doing here is he's not making up and gathering all his favorite names for God. He's not like, well, I like the compassionate God, and I like this side of God. He's not doing that. What he's doing is he's quoting Exodus 34, which is interesting, because that is right on the heels of God delivering his people out of their slavery in Egypt. And you want to know how they thanked God for that amazing deliverance through the Red Sea? They grew impatient with God. They complained. They whined. They felt like God was taking too long. And so they built a golden calf. And they said, behold your God who led you out of Egypt. And God, rightfully so, was going to judge them. And Moses interceded for them. Right? And then he came down the mountain with this message that God had given him to reveal to his people what he was like. And what did he say? God said this, I am a God Exodus 34, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So Jonah is not making up his version of God, he's just playing the hits, right? He's like, this is who God has revealed himself to be. And so think about this for a second. Doesn't that story in the book of Exodus sound a little bit similar to Jonah chapter 3? People who deserve God's judgment, but God is compassionate towards them. His anger is kind of laughable in a sense, right? I mean, is Nineveh receiving any different grace than what God's people have been receiving for all these generations? Right? God says, this is who I am, this is what I'm like, this is my name, these are my attributes, you could take them to the bank. You can always expect, guys, you can always expect God to act according to his character. He's not usually gracious and compassionate and slow to anger. He's not most of the time that way, but he has bad days, and so there's times where you don't know, right? That's not what it's presenting here. This is who God is. This is his character. This is his heart. And it flows into his actions. It determines his actions. You could take it to the bank. This is his name. We named our third-born son, you all know him as Gus, we named him August William. If you know anything about names, his name means majestic warrior. Whew. Yeah, those are pretty big shoes to fill, right? That's pretty high expectations. Not quite sure I realized that's what we were naming him when we named him this, but afterwards I was like, oh, buddy, majestic warrior, these are some high shoes, to fill. And so we nicknamed him Gus just to kind of lower expectations a little bit, you know what I mean? So nonetheless, no, we love Gus. He loves his name. But just imagine, though, in a real sense, imagine Gus grew up to be this really sheepish and cowardly man, right? And he is not on that trajectory, let's be honest. He's very tenderhearted and compassionate. He's an amazing kid. He was just baptized a few weeks ago, but he's brave, he's bold, he's willing to go out there and put himself out there, and he's a strong kid, and so in a sense, we see him already living into that name, right? But we all understand that just because you're named something doesn't mean that person's gonna live up to it, right? And let's be honest, there are certain names that parents are giving their kids nowadays that we hope kids don't live into, right? I mean, we hope they don't become what their name means, right? But nonetheless, right, we have no guarantee that we will live into our own names. And so we kind of import that onto God. And he said he's that way, but maybe he won't live up to it today. And Jonas has the opposite reaction. He goes, no, I knew you were this way. This is why I ran. I knew I could count on you to be who you've always shown yourself to be. And he's angry. And so God comes to him. He's so angry, in fact, that he says, I want to die, right? Which is pretty dramatic. And then God comes to him, and what does he say? Do you do well to be angry, Jonah? What's he saying? He's saying, Jonah, how is anger making your life any better? Does that make you feel better? Or does it make anything better? And what's Jonah's response? It's just silence. He goes outside the city of Nineveh, and he makes this booth for himself to be shaded from the sun. He's seeking this comfort while he looks out, and it says he's watching to see what becomes of the city. And we don't know what's going on in his head. He's already mad that God didn't judge them. So maybe he's sitting there thinking, well, God relented the first time. Maybe he'll relent again, and maybe he will judge him. We don't know what he's thinking, right? But he's kind of pouting, isn't he? And then God appoints the second thing in the book. And here is where we learn that our reactions reveal our hearts. Our reactions reveal our hearts. God's heart is always revealed. It's demonstrated in his actions, but our reactions, guys, it's telling you a lot about your heart. Look at verse 6. It says, now the Lord appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die and said, it is better for me to die than to live. But God said to Jonah, do you do well to be angry for the plant? And he said, yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. Remember, what was the first thing God appointed in Jonah's life? Do you remember? It was a fish, right? That's what the book said. He appointed a fish to swallow up Jonah. This is the second thing he's appointed now. And what is it? It's a plant. Right? It miraculously grew up overnight and it became shade to Jonah. And do you see what happened? It brought him comfort. Verse 6. This is the first time in the whole book of Jonah that he is happy. He's happy. What does it say? He is exceedingly glad. In striking contrast to verse 1 where he was exceedingly displeased with what God did. He's so happy about this plant, about this shade, right? This is a nice piece of shade. It must be hot. I don't know. But he's finally glad. He's got some comfort in his life. He's finally got something he wanted, right? To bring him some peace into his life. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm convicted about this week, There was a guy named Isaac Adams. He's still alive. He's a pastor and author, and he once said, if we're only content when circumstances are good, then it's not the Lord we're content in. If I'm only happy, if I'm only content when things are going the way I want them to go, that's not the Lord I'm content in. I just had a moment of a magical land that doesn't really exist, right? That's what Jonah's experiencing here. And in verse 7, dawn comes in the morning, and God appoints a third thing in the book. It's a worm. And he appoints it to kill the plant, right? You see that? It dies. And then God appoints a fourth thing in the book, a scorching east wind, and it makes Jonah feel less comfortable, right? So he's miserable again. This is a roller coaster of like 48 hours or something for him, right? The sun's beating down on him so bad that he feels faint, and it drives him to once again say, I just wish I could die. Lord, take my life. That would be better than living. He's not in a good place, right? He is not in a good place. Guys, when you read the book of Jonah, especially the situation, don't you just want to hang out with Jonah? Like, doesn't he just sound like so refreshing to be around for a weekend, Just going to build you up or something? No, right? We get this, right? In a sense, like, there's people that we know that just complain a lot, right? There might be people that complain a lot or they're really cynical about everything. And right? You see those people and you just kind of like, and you kind of run. You kind of go the other direction, don't you? Right? I'm the only person? Am I the only... Not a good Christian, I guess. I don't know. But we get this, right? And I'm bringing this up for a reason, though. Why? Because what is amazing to me is I read Jonah and I'm like, I don't want to hang out with that guy. Not at all. But God does not seem to be exhausted by him at all. God has so much compassion for Jonah too. So much. What does he say again? He asks him the same question, but he kind of adds specificity to it. Do you do well to be angry for the plant? For the plant. You have pity for the plant, right? Not about the plant, for it, right? Do you do well? And here Jonah finally answers the question. Yeah, I do. I do well to be angry for the plant. Well, what's happening here? Why is God appointing all these things? Why is he sending a plant and a worm and a wind and all these things? Why is he doing this? Is he just messing around with Jonah? Not in particular. He's trying to wake Jonah up. He's so messed up right now in his thinking and his heart. God's trying to wake him up. He gives him the plan, he takes it away in order to do what? To reveal Jonah's heart. To reveal where it's at. I'll be honest with you. Just think about it. What you complain about reveals a lot about your heart. And in kind of combination with that, the things that you look to make you content, comforted, also reveal a lot about your heart. A lot. This is meant to wake him up to those things. Sometimes we need a wake-up call. And the good news is God is willing to give that to us. We just think God sent Jonah a storm, a fish. There was a revival. He's asked him some questions. He sent a plant, a worm, a wind. He's going to have a couple more questions at the very end of the book. He gets the full spectrum of the ways that God wakes us up, right? Storm, fish, shade. What I mean is he sends us into hard times and times of relief. But he's not playing games with Jonah. He's not being mean to Jonah. He's kind of grabbing the spiritual smelling salts and kind of making our hearts kind of wake up for a moment. He's waking him up to what, though? Well, if you knew Hebrew well, which I don't either. Hebrew is like my least favorite class, just being honest with you. But thank the Lord for Logos Bible software, okay? So, but nonetheless, if you and I knew Hebrew really well and we heard this book read to us, you would notice something really interesting here. We would quickly see what God is waking up Jonah to. There's a really important word in the book, and most likely, if you have a good Bible, it has a little footnote to it. So you're reading a word, and it has a little italicized number on the top right corner of a word, and it'll kind of direct your eyes down to your footnotes, right? And there's one that keeps coming up. You might see it in your footnotes. It's a Hebrew word. The word is ra'ah. Ra'ah. It's translated evil. It's translated evil. Sometimes it comes out in our English as disaster or discomfort. But just think about what the book of Jonah is doing here and how it uses this word, okay? Chapter 1, verse 2, what does God say? Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their ra'ah has come up before me. They're evil. Chapter 1, verse 7, there's a big storm, and so the mariners gather together, and what do they say? Come, let us cast lots that we may know on whose account this ra'ah has come up upon us. They're trying to figure out what evil is here that's creating this storm. Then in chapter 3, verse 8, what does it say? The king announces to everybody, hey, let us call out mightily to God, let everyone turn from his ra'ah and the violence that is in his hands. Turn from your evil. Look at verse 10 of chapter 3. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their ra'ah, God relented. Right? They're turning from their evil. But then look at chapter 4. It's interesting. Verse 1. But God's compassion for Ninevites was ra'ah to Jonah. He looked at what God did, and he said, that is evil. That's so messed up, God, that you did that. How does God respond to him? Chapter 4, verse 6, the last time, God appointed a plant, made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head to do what? To save him from his ra'ah, his evil in his heart. This coming full circle, God's giving the shade. He's taking it away as an object lesson to expose the evil in his heart. In a very similar way for us, and there's nothing more important to God than to awaken us to our own. I mean, look at verse 2, Jonah's confession. I knew you were this way. He has theological convictions. Like he's got good doctrine. Oh, let me quote Exodus 34. Right, I know God. He's got good doctrine, but his heart is not lined up, is it? He has no desire for God to be who God is, even though he knows who God is. Francis Schaeffer, 20th century church history figure, famously said, I think convictingly so, he said, biblical orthodoxy without compassion is surely the ugliest thing in this world. To know God in your head, but to have the coldness and not share his heart is ugly, right? And we all see it, don't we? We see it out there. We can point it out. But the book of Jonah is not just for you to go, it's out there. The book of Jonah is to say, is it in here? Is it in here? Do you do well to be angry for the plant, Jonah? Somehow Jonah's developed an attachment to this plant. He has compassion from the womb over the death of the plant. God's saying, do you even see your heart right now? Do you even see it right now? You have misplaced values, right? You're compassionate about the wrong things. I'll be vulnerable with you. I could probably sum up every single one of my parenting failures along the lines of having a misplacement of compassion. Right? It's well documented from this stage in my life that I like things to be clean and organized and all that kind of stuff, right? And so there are a few rare moments in my life where all the yard work's done, everything's immaculate inside, and it's just like, oh, I'm exceedingly glad, right? I am content in my circumstances, right? And then one of my children or something, especially when they're younger, like would dump out an entire box of cereal over the floor on accident, you know? And in those moments, how do you think I respond? If that's really what I want is a clean house. I go, oh, it's okay. You're more important to me than, spilled cereal on the floor. Let's just pick it up together, right? Is that what I'm doing, right? You would expect that, but no, I'm made of the same stuff you are, right? And there are those moments, right, where I'm like coming down on my kid, and then later I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, you're way more important than a clean floor, right? We can misplace our compassion. And then later, God's compassion wakes us up to our lack of compassion. This happens all the time in our lives. We have these object lessons. And there's a lot of evaluation questions we could be asking this morning. I mean, Burke Parsons once, I think, said something effective. If God were to answer every single one of your prayers, say God were to answer every one of your prayers, would your neighbor know Christ, or would you have a lot of stuff? You could read that, would I have a more comfortable life if God answered all my prayers? Or would my neighbors know Christ? Right? When we misplace our compassion, there are serious things at stake in that, right? Serious things at stake. This whole book, you guys, has been about Jonah. We keep thinking it's about Nineveh, but it's not. It's about Jonah, and therefore it's about us. It's written in a way to wake us up, to get our attention, but not to crush us. To realign our hearts. To realign our hearts. That's the purpose of the cliffhanger, which leads to the third thing, right? It's the question. I'm asking it in a question because the book ends with a question. Are we in sync with the heart of God? With the heart of God. Again, longest portion that God talks in this whole book. The Lord said, you pity the plant, for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who don't know their left hand from their right hand, and also much cattle? Right? Again, a weird way to end the book. Why the cattle? We have so many questions, right, about the cattle. They were wearing sackcloth and ashes in the prior chapter, Here they are, God's caring about them. But the point is, I think, is that God is showing you his care for all of creation. For all of creation. He even has compassion for the cattle. Right? He's saying, Jonah, look at this city, 120,000 persons, lots of other things in the city. That would be the makeup of Redlands and Highland combined. Right? The idea is he's out on the side of the hill looking out over the city. Right? This would be like you being up at Prospect Park looking out over Highland and Redlands, and God's saying to you, look at those people. Right? I pity them. I have from the womb compassion for them. But the plant catches your eye. Right? One of these things is not like the other. Right? Look at this city filled with people who walk in darkness, Jonah. They don't even know what's right and wrong. He says they don't know their left hand from their right hand, meaning they look at their left hand and they go, that's my right hand. They look at their right hand, they say, that's my left hand. Anybody who knows which hand's which goes, that's wrong. Right? But think about it. What he's saying is that they don't know their hands, their handedness. He's saying they look at things that are good and they say that's evil. They look at things that are evil and say that's good. And don't we see that all the time in this world? People who look at good things and say that's evil, and you're like, that's God's heart. That's God's will. Right? Well, we see this, but it's also in our lives too. Because what did Jonah do? He saw God's compassion in chapter 3, and he looked at it and he said, that's evil. In a way, God's saying, do you know your handedness? Do you know what my heart is? Right? Well, we got to remember, you guys, this was read aloud. I mean, they didn't have like printed Bibles that we could throw in our backpacks and go down to the beach with our Tommy Bahama chairs and like do our devotionals, which is amazing, right? I'm thankful for the printing press, right? But back in this time, I mean, the only time you'd hear the word of Jonah read, would have been in a meeting like this. People get together, some would get up and read the book of Jonah, and so just think about the impact that would have. A lot of scholars say that they would have been receiving the book of Jonah while they were in exile, surrounded by their enemies, the Babylonians. So think about that. Someone's reading the book of Jonah, they get to the end, should I not pity, should I have compassion from the womb for that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left hand, and also much cattle? And everyone's going to be like, what's with the cattle, right? Maybe there's some laughter, some nervous laughter, and everyone goes, okay, and what's next? Someone's like, that's how it ends, right? And maybe after the laughter dies down a little bit, they're thinking about where they're at as they're hearing this word, surrounded by their own enemies that just conquered them. Maybe it gets a little quiet. Oh, wait, this is about us. God loves our enemies. Do we? You know, God's compassion sounds so nice, but if we're being honest, his compassion will bother you sometimes. Like, he's so compassionate that if you really saw it, if you really understood how compassionate he was, it might annoy you a little bit. Because we want him to hold a grudge against the same people that we do, but God won't. And so if our spirit lacks compassion for other people, then we immediately can know that we are out of touch with the heart of God. We're out of sync. And so that's what we're meant to feel. That's what Jonah's meant to see. That's what you and I are meant to consider. Sinclair Ferguson, the great Sinclair Ferguson, wrote a little tiny book, commentary on the book of Jonah. And in that book, he calls what Jonah's going through here the Jonah syndrome. And I'm just going to read for you what he said. He said, this was a devastating critique on Jonah's spiritual condition. This is a prophet, right? Don't forget that. But it raises an issue no less disturbing about our own lives as Christians. Could the same be said about us? Do we care more about the items in our gardens, the produce of our fields, or perhaps the contents of our garage or home than we do about our fellow men and women and the spread of the gospel to them? Do we care more about our own comfort, our own sense of fragile contentedness, than about the nations knowing Jesus in our time? I shared this weeks ago, I think, at CBU, but I've always been so struck by this story that Hudson Taylor's kids wrote about, where he went to China. He was a missionary to China in the early 1900s, and he went and shared the gospel with a guy in China, and the guy received Christ. And Hudson Taylor was set out from England, and the guy received it with joy. He was like, oh man, this is amazing. And he said to him, like, hey, how long have you known about this in your country? And Hudson Taylor was like, a few hundred years. And the guy began to break down crying, say, a few hundred years? My dad sought the truth all of his life, and he died. Why did you not come sooner? That's an honest question, right? It's a hard question. So what are we gonna do about this, right? I think the big temptation is we close a book like Jonah, and if we don't just simply go, all right, what's for lunch? But we say, like, oh man, I gotta do something about this. I think our temptation is we go, all right, I'm gonna go be more compassionate. I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna be more compassionate this week. I'm gonna give some money. I'm gonna go tell somebody. I'm gonna do whatever it is, right? We begin to think that way. We have a problem if we do that, if that's your only response. If you think the point is just go be more compassionate, right? Because that's like me saying, hey guys, I'm gonna enter the NBA dunk contest next year and I'm gonna win, right? I have no vertical, right? I mean, so unless They lower the hoop to 6 feet and they raise the other people's hoop to 16 feet. Maybe I'll have a shot, right? But I can't just say I'm going to do it, right? I don't have the body for it, right? I don't have the DNA that makes that possible in my life. In a similar way, if I just leave here today and I go, I'm going to go be more compassionate now, that's the equivalent, I think, of us taking a balloon and filling it up with our own hot air and hoping it'll float. It's just going to fall to the ground. And so what do we got to do to keep that balloon afloat? We got to keep hitting the balloon up into the air, right? Which is a pretty fun game sometimes. But if you had to do that every single moment of your life, you're just constantly having to hit the balloon and keep it up, saying, I'll be more compassionate this week. I'm going to go be more compassionate. The ball, the balloon falls to the ground. I feel really bad about myself. I pick it back up, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go back and be more compassionate now, right? I got to keep the balloon afloat somehow, right? How am I going to do that? That's hard to do. I mean, C.S. Lewis even said, no one knows how bad they are until they try to be really good. And then you're like, man, I'm not very good. Right? It's like telling someone who's really anxious, saying, hey, just stop being anxious. Just be at peace. They're going to be like, it doesn't work that way. You can't just tell them to stop being anxious, right? There's something else that has to happen. Right? I need like helium to fill the balloon. So what will make you share God's heart? What's going to line you up with the heart of God? What will do it? What will do it? I promise you there is only one thing. It's not a trick. It is the absolute truth. The only way that your heart will ever be lined up with God, where you have like a helium in your life and not your own hot air, is if you see that God really is this compassionate. This really is who He is. And in order to align your and my heart with His, He didn't send us a fish. He didn't send us a plant. He didn't send us a worm. He didn't send us some eastbound wind. He sent us a prophet, the true prophet, the prophet we've all been waiting for, who came into this world not with another message of something that you need to go and do right now, but He came not with a message, but as the Word made flesh. He sent us none other than Jesus Christ Himself to enter into this world and do what? Not just that we be woken up from our ra'ah, the evil in our hearts. No, the storms and trials in life will do stuff like that to us. We don't just need to be woken up. We need to be saved. We need to be aligned. And so what does He do? Jesus Christ comes into this world filled with compassion. And what does He do? He goes outside of the city, doesn't He? But He doesn't go outside the city and sit on the hill looking over Jerusalem, hoping that God's going to judge them. No, He knew that judgment was going to come down outside of the city. So the author of Hebrews says what in chapter 13? Jesus suffered outside of the city on the cross, right? In order to sanctify the people through His own blood. Therefore, let us go to Him outside the city and bear the reproach He endured. Let us take up our cross. Let us go to Him. Let us follow Him. Let us not look for temporary comforts and contentedness in this world. Let us go to Him and bear His reproach. Because He is the one who is so unlike Jonah. He's the true one. See, Jonah's character drove him to want to take life, but Jesus' character drove him to want to give His life. And so, Jonah is a book about a good God that loves people so much. He is so overwhelmed with compassion from the womb that He won't allow you and I to be centered on ourselves. Instead, He comes to free us from ourselves. Guys, this is the only thing that'll align your heart. It's the truth, I'm telling you. It's to see that God's compassion from the womb is actually for you, which is what compassion is, right? I want to trade places with you. And He did that. He did that. This is why if you see people that ever work in any sort of compassion ministry or anything like that, and I always love asking those people, why do you do that? Why do you give your time to go minister to the homeless? Or why do you give your time to people who are formerly addicted? They always say what? I used to be that. I always used to be that. When it's there, when it's your story, it'll direct you with compassion for the same types of people. Right, this is the only way, you guys. It's got to be outside of yourself. This is the only thing that will align your heart. This is like the equivalent of sitting down, right, and seeing a beautiful sunset. or something like that. It calms you, doesn't it? You don't have to tell yourself to be calm. It just does it. I mean, last night, wasn't the sunset in Southern California just stunning? Oh my goodness, I was driving back from Riverside with my son and, trying to keep us alive while also staring at the sunset. And I was even calm when I was on the 91 freeway right by it, right? I wasn't trying to calm myself down. I was just staring at the beauty of the sunset. That's exactly why when you go to the Grand Canyon or Zion National Park or Yosemite or the top of San G or the Pacific Ocean or something, and you just sit there and you stare out at the beauty and the wonder and the greatness of what you're staring at, there's just a humility that comes over you, right? I've said this before. I don't know anybody who's ever stood in front of the Grand Canyon and had the thought enter into their mind, I'm pretty awesome. Right? No one's ever stared at the Grand Canyon and had that thought come into their minds, right? Why? Because you're staring at something so great that you're just thinking about how little you're not awesome. You're tiny. That's awesome. This is what I'm saying. It's not a trick. It's the truth, right? I mean, if you see God's compassion for your life, and that's what you leave here today focused on, that's like helium in your life. That is gospel helium. Our goal is not to leave just being like, I'm going to do this. It's leaving saying, He's done this for me. God, align my heart to you.